Week 7's right around the corner. Let's talk about some pass catchers, some wide receivers start sits here for Week 7 of the fantasy football season. Hey, what's going on, everybody? Jake, Fantasy Headliners. Hopefully everybody's doing well out there. Here we are talking wide receivers, Week 7 starts and sits. Going to go through all the matchups, going to go through them as quickly as I possibly can. Timestamps are in the description for those of you trying to get the information a little bit quicker. But hey, I greatly appreciate the support. The longer you watch this video, the more it helps me out. So I really appreciate that. Make sure you guys are heading over to the RotoBaller channel after this show is over. Make sure you're subscribed there. The Sunday live shows have been a huge hit. Last minute injury updates, weather updates, start sit advice, all happens there on Sunday. So make sure you go over there, check that out. And for right now, let's talk about some wide receivers. Let's get right into this list. Thursday Night Football, you got Broncos at Cardinals. So we'll start off with Emmanuel Sanders and Demaryius Thomas. Right now, Emmanuel Sanders is the safer option out of these two. He's had double-digit fantasy points in every single week this season in PPR leagues, and he's somebody who's not really touchdown dependent, and he has a high floor for you. Demaryius Thomas, yes, the past 2 weeks he's had a touchdown, which has really boosted his production. However, has he turned into somebody who's somewhat touchdown dependent? It's possible. He hasn't had more than 6 catches. That was way back in week 1. He's only gone over 100 yards once so far this year, and more than likely he's going to be shadowed by Patrick Peterson, which is really going to limit his production this week. I do have them both as starts. However, I'm tempering expectations on Demaryius Thomas, no more than a flex play if possible. Emmanuel Sanders, on the other hand, is somebody who I think has wide receiver 2 upside this week, and I really like the matchup going up against the Arizona Cardinals, which are better against the pass than the run. However, yeah, Emmanuel Sanders, he's a start. Demaryius Thomas, flex play only if you have no better options. Cardinals side of the football, you got Larry Fitzgerald, who just can't seem to A, get healthy, and B, get on the same page as Josh Rosen, and Christian Kirk, who I really like going forward. I talked about him in my waiver wire video. Christian Kirk is going to start asserting himself in this offense, and in PPR leagues, he's turning into somebody who could be a solid flex play for you week in and week out. Now, this Denver defense is not what it used to be, obviously. However, they are the 10th ranked defense against opposing wide receivers, giving up on average 33.5 points per game to opposing wide receivers, and 2 weeks ago gave up 3 touchdowns to the New York Jets. This is a team that can be had through the air, and I like Christian Kirk a lot this week. I actually had him as one of my starts of the week over on the RotoBaller channel as a surprise start. It's a bold move, but I really like him this week going forward. Larry Fitzgerald, though, as much as I hate it, he's a sit for me this week. He just can't get healthy, and he can't get on the same page as Josh Rosen. I'm going to have to sit Larry Fitzgerald here for the next few weeks, and I'm rolling with Christian Kirk. Titans and Chargers are next. Starting off with the Titans, you have Taywan Taylor and Corey Davis. And really, I don't want a whole lot of this offense here in Tennessee. Too inconsistent. Corey Davis has a huge ceiling, crazy high ceiling. Back in week 4, he had 9 catches, 161 yards, and a touchdown. Since then, he's got 75 total yards on 5 catches the last 2 weeks combined. It is a decent matchup against the Los Angeles Chargers, currently 23rd against opposing wide receivers, giving up on average 39 points a game, and have given up a receiving touchdown every single week this year, with the exception of last week against the Browns. It's definitely a team that you can throw on. However, they really struggle throwing the ball and even moving the ball in Tennessee. Corey Davis is a flex play at best for me. I'm going to sit Taywan Taylor, and I really have no interest in either one of these guys if you have better options. On the Chargers side of the football, you have Keenan Allen and now Tyrell Williams, the other Williams dude, not Mike Williams. But Keenan Allen owners are starting to get frustrated, and I somewhat understand that. He's currently the 23rd ranked wide receiver in PPR formats, and when you drafted him, you expected better production. But don't give up on Keenan Allen yet. They have a decent matchup this week going up against the Tennessee Titans, who are definitely easier to throw against than run against. But the Titans are currently giving up 37 points per game to opposing wide receivers. Last week against the Baltimore Ravens, gave up 193 yards and a touchdown to those wide receivers. And it's definitely something that you don't want to take a risk on sitting Keenan Allen. His upside is absolutely huge. Back in week 1, 8 catches, 108 yards, touchdown. That's something that you could get almost every week from Keenan Allen. Don't give up on him yet. Better days to come. He's a definite must-start for me. Tyrell Williams is somebody who's now creeping back into that number 2 role in this Los Angeles Chargers offense. Last 2 weeks, he's only had 3 catches each week. But right now, last week, he had 3 catches for 118 yards and 2 touchdowns. It's something that Phillip Rivers is starting to look for deeper down the field. And if he can continue to get these looks, he's somebody who we're going to have to start considering in weeks to come. But for this week, I'm sitting Tyrell Williams. Texans and Jags are next. So we'll start off with the Texans, talking about DeAndre Hopkins, who I would start if he only had one leg. I would still start him. I really don't care who he's playing, who's covering him. It doesn't matter. You start DeAndre Hopkins. Will Fuller, who's been a very big disappointment the past few weeks. Last 2 weeks combined, 4 catches for 48 yards and a total of 8 fantasy points. That is very disappointing for all the Will Fuller owners. And that has to do because of the emergence of Kiki Do You Love Me QT, who the past 3 weeks has a combined 20 catches through his first 3 NFL games. He's somebody who Deshaun Watson is looking at and is taking away the volume from Will Fuller. This week, however, tough matchup. I'm going to sit Will Fuller. I'm going to start DeAndre Hopkins. And here's a little bit of a bold one. If you're in a deeper league looking for a flex play, I'm gambling and starting Kiki QT this week if I have no better options. On the Jacksonville side of the football, it really depends on which Blake Bortles shows up. Is it the Blake Bortles that's dropping dimes from a couple weeks ago? Or is it the Blake Bortles that's throwing the ball into the back of his offensive linemen's helmets? You just don't know. He is that inconsistent. So we have Keelan Cole, Dede Westbrook, and Dante Moncrief. Do you trust any of them? They are all very much hit and miss. If I had to trust one of them this week, it's Dede Westbrook. He's scored double-digit fantasy points 4 out of the 6 weeks so far this season. He's somebody who's not going to go out there and get crazy high numbers, but he sees the volume. The matchup against the Houston Texans, it's a tough one. They're the 6th ranked defense against opposing wide receivers, giving up on average 31.5 points per game. They have given up a receiving touchdown to an opponent wide receiver every single week this season, which is a plus for these Jacksonville Jaguars wide receivers. However, they've only given up 1. In the last 2 weeks, they've only given up a total of 12 receptions to opposing wide receivers. They are an improved defense in Houston. However, if I'm going to roll the dice on any of these guys in Jacksonville, the safest bet in my mind is Dede Westbrook. Panthers and Eagles are next, and here we come to the first hashtag, usually of the show. I got asked in the comments section here after week 6, is it time to start using the hashtag sometimes Funchess or hashtag maybe Funchess? And I got to be real with you, I just can't make myself do it. I've bashed the guy all year, all offseason. Yes, he had a decent game last week against the Redskins, 5 catches, 74 yards, and a touchdown. And he's got a decent matchup this week against the Philadelphia Eagles, who are the 26th ranked defense against opposing wide receivers, giving up on average 42.2 points per game. I get it. But can I really go against the hashtag? The answer is no, I can't. I got to stick with it. I started it. I got to see it through. Never Funchess. I'm sitting him. On the Eagles side of the football, you have Alshon Jeffrey and Nelson Aguilar. Now, I would like to say you're welcome to all the Philadelphia Eagle fans. I came out last week on this show and said, you know what? I'm not quite bought into Alshon Jeffrey yet. I'm going to sit him last week. And then Alshon Jeffrey went out, had 8 catches, 74 yards, and 2 touchdowns. So you're welcome. Apparently I sparked a fire, or maybe I just jinxed him into having a good game. He looked great. They do have a tough matchup. The Carolina Panthers are the 18th ranked, so middle of the road defense there against opposing wide receivers, giving up on average 36.8 points per game. But I've learned my lesson. Alshon Jeffrey is back. He's healthy. He's Carson Wentz's favorite target. I'm going to start Alshon Jeffrey. Nelson Aguilar had a decent game, 3 catches but 91 yards. He's just been the more inconsistent option ever since Wentz came back. He's more of somebody who I just want on my bench as depth for right now, not somebody who I trust on a week-to-week basis. So I'm going to sit Nelson Aguilar this week. Vikings and Jets are next, and if you have a roster where you're actually contemplating whether you should start or sit Adam Thielen or Stephon Diggs, congratulations to you, because your roster is absolutely stacked. Both of these guys are must-starts for me, week in, week out, no questions asked. So if you're really debating on it, your team must be absolutely loaded, and you're probably fine either way. But for me, yeah, they're both must-starts regardless of the matchup. On the Jets side of the football, you have Jermaine Kearse, Terrell Pryor, and Robbie Anderson. Now that Quincy Enunwa is going to miss a few weeks, and to me, if you're in a PPR league, the safest option is Jermaine Kearse. Last week, 9 catches, 94 yards, 18 fantasy points in PPR leagues, and he looks to be the volume guy in this offense. However, the touchdown upside may be more towards Terrell Pryor and Robbie Anderson. Terrell Pryor has touchdowns in the last 2 weeks. However, 2 weeks ago, he only had 1 catch for that touchdown, and he's somebody who just doesn't see the volume as of yet. But could that change with the absence of Quincy Enunwa? Robbie Anderson is very much home run dependent. We saw it back in week 5 against Denver. The guy had 3 catches, 123 yards, and 2 touchdowns, and looked unstoppable. And then last week against the Colts, he had a whole 3 for 39 and looked human again. He's the one who's really inconsistent. He's the home run play. He's more of the DFS pick for me than the week-by-week, season-long leagues, just because he's not consistent enough. As of right now, if I had to rank these 3 guys in this offense, I would go Jermaine Kearse, Terrell Pryor, Robbie Anderson. As far as season-long goes, Terrell Pryor, I think, has the touchdown upside. Jermaine Kearse sees the volume. Robbie Anderson's the lottery ticket that could go out there and get you 3, or he could get you 27. Do you want to take that risk? I don't. Patriots and Bears are next, so we got Julian Edelman and Josh Gordon. Josh Gordon, who led the Patriots in targets from the wide receiver position here last week, and I'm really not too surprised about it. They're going to get him involved more and more each week. Last week ended up with 5 catches, 42 yards. Not a huge week, but they're starting to involve him. The big games are going to come. Julian Edelman had a decent week, 4 catches for 54 yards and a touchdown. Ended up with 15 fantasy points, which is a solid, wide receiver too. And now they get the Chicago Bears defense. And on paper, that sounds really bad. However, the Chicago Bears defense is currently the 30th ranked defense against opposing wide receivers. Last week against the Dolphins, they gave up 18 receptions, 281 yards, and 2 touchdowns to opposing wide receivers. Good enough for 58 fantasy points. They, on average, give up 43.6 points to opposing wide receivers, and they are definitely easier to throw against than run against. I'm not sitting any part of the New England Patriot offense here for a while. I'm starting both Julian Edelman and Josh Gordon this week, and I'm not worried about the Bears matchup at all. On the Bears side of the football, you have Allen Robinson and Taylor Gabriel. Both are going to be starts for me this week. It's a decent matchup against a New England secondary that has given up a lot of points here so far this season. They've given up a total of 9 touchdowns through the air to opposing wide receivers, on average 38.2 points per game, and they're going to have to throw the ball in Chicago to keep pace with the New England Patriots. This offense is starting to click in New England, and the Bears defense, as good as they may be, are not going to be able to hold them down completely. They're going to have to throw the ball in this game. I'm starting both Allen Robinson and Taylor Gabriel this week against the New England Patriots. Bills and Colts are next, and I'll be completely honest, I'd rather go swimming in battery acid than start any wide receiver of the Buffalo Bills, regardless of who the quarterback is. For the Colts, we still don't really know about T.Y. Hilton. Is he going to play or not? I have a feeling we may not know for a couple more days. If I had to guess at the point of this recording, I say he sits another week. But now they're banged up all over the place at the wide receiving group there in Indianapolis. Ryan Grant dealing with injuries. Then they went to Marcus Johnson last week, who's now been placed on IR. Really, the only healthy options they have as of today are Chester Rogers and Zach Pascal. And is that somebody who we really want to start in our fantasy football league? Chester Rogers, I'll say yes to. He's a definite flex play, especially if T.Y. Hilton sits. He's had double-digit points 3 straight weeks, including last week 4 catches, 55 yards, and a touchdown. Going up against a Buffalo Bills secondary, though, which is a lot better than people give them credit for. They've allowed 5 touchdowns through the air, however, only 1 of them to an opposing wide receiver in the last 4 weeks. They're definitely improved. On average, giving up 31.5 points per game. Like I said, good enough for 6th in fantasy football. It's a decent secondary there in Buffalo. But the only option that I'm going to start here is Chester Rogers if T.Y. Hilton sits. If T.Y. Hilton is good enough to go and he plays, I plug T.Y. Hilton in. But as of right now, Chester Rogers is really the only healthy option that I would trust in my fantasy lineup. Browns and Bucks are next. We got Jarvis Landry and Antonio Callaway, both who have been pretty disappointing here as of late. Last week, Jarvis Landry had 2 catches for 11 yards. I thought it was a typo. I thought there was a number missing. The dude only had 3 fantasy points last week, and this is Jarvis Landry, who could be one of the top receivers in all of football. He's been very inconsistent, hasn't gone over 100 yards since week 3 against the New York Jets, and only has 1 receiving touchdown on the year. Antonio Callaway, another one of these guys, huge upside, just can't seem to get on the same page with Baker Mayfield, but this could be the week for both of them, and I'm going to start them both, which I know is a little bold, especially for Antonio Callaway, but they're going up against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, one of the worst secondaries in all of football, currently the 31st ranked team against opposing wide receivers, giving up on average 48.2 points per game. They've given up a receiving touchdown to opposing wide receivers every single game this week. Last week against the Atlanta Falcons, 19 catches, 278 yards, and a touchdown to opposing wide receivers. They give up a lot of yardage in this secondary. And the Tampa Bay offense has been scoring some points. So if they can score some points against this Cleveland Browns team, it's going to force them to throw more. I'm looking for Antonio Callaway to get, a productive game this week, and I'm going to start both him and Jarvis, but it's a gamble on Callaway, and I accept that. On the Bucs side of the football, you have Mike Evans, Deshaun Jackson, and Chris Godwin, all 3 who are going to be starts for me this week. Also, Godwin more of a flex, Deshaun Jackson as a wide receiver 2. Evans, somebody who I know frustrated owners the past 2 weeks that he's played. Last week against the Falcons in a great matchup, only had 4 catches for 58 yards. Don't give up on Mike Evans, though. Had a great start to the season. Really expect him to bring it back on here towards the middle end of the season. Deshaun Jackson, somebody who's going to be one of those home run guys all the time. Had 4 catches for 77 yards last week. He's somebody who has that touchdown upside. Chris Godwin is probably the most consistent out of all of them. He scored double-digit points 4 out of the 5 weeks that they've played so far, including last week 6 catches for 56 yards and a touchdown. They're going to be going up against the Cleveland Browns defense, currently 24th against opposing wide receivers, giving up almost 40 points a game. Last week, though, against the Chargers, they kind of held them somewhat in check. They only gave up 8 receptions to the Chargers wide receivers, but it was good for 184 yards and 2 touchdowns. That's basically Tyrell Williams. They did great against Keenan Allen. However, I'm going to start all 3 of these guys if need be, and especially in deeper leagues. I know Chris Godwin, if you're in a 10-team league, probably isn't going to crack your lineup. But if you're in one of these 12 to 14-team leagues, definitely like Chris Godwin this week. And I'm starting both Deshaun Jackson and Mike Evans also. Lions and Dolphins are next. So for the Lions, you got Golden Tate, Marvin Jones, and Kenny Galladay. And, can we really sit any of these guys in such a high-powered passing offense of the Detroit Lions coming off a bye week, going up against the Miami Dolphins secondary, which is pretty decent against opposing wide receivers? They're currently the 12th ranked team, but last week against Chicago, they gave up 11 receptions, 203 yards, and 2 touchdowns. They've given up multiple touchdowns to opposing wide receivers 2 out of the last 3 weeks that they've played. This is something where you just don't take the risk on sitting one of these guys. Golden Tate, Marvin Jones, Kenny Galladay, coming off of a bye week, are all starts for me here in Week 7. On the Miami Dolphins side of the football, you have Kenny Stills and Albert Wilson. Now, recency bias is going to have you wanting to start Albert Wilson because last week he had 6 catches for 155 yards and 2 touchdowns against the Chicago Bears. But does that mean that he's all of a sudden a must start here in Week 7? Not so much. He's definitely somebody who should be picked up and rostered at this point, but the quarterback situation's still up in the air. He had Brock Osweiler, who all of a sudden looked like an all-pro quarterback last week. Is that what's going to stay? What's the health like of Ryan Tannehill? There's a lot of questions in this Miami Dolphins offense. Yes, 3 out of the 6 weeks, Albert Wilson has scored double-digit fantasy points. In all 3 of those weeks, he had touchdowns. In the weeks that he didn't score a touchdown, he was getting stat lines of like 4 for 19, 5 for 43, 3 for 31. So he is kind of this boom or bust play. Unless you're in a deeper 12 team or larger, I'm not going to start Albert Wilson this week. Kenny Stills kind of in the same boat. Really home run dependent. Hasn't scored a touchdown since week 3 against the Oakland Raiders. The Detroit Lions secondary, a lot better than people give them credit for. They're currently the 4th ranked fantasy defense against opposing wide receivers, giving up 30 points per game. Their last game, week 5, was against Green Bay. They gave up 297 yards and 2 touchdowns to Aaron Rodgers, and that really skewed the numbers. They're even better than that number suggests, just because that last game really skewed the numbers going forward. I'm going to sit all the Miami Dolphins wide receivers this week. Albert Wilson is on the radar, but he's not quite a start yet. Saints and Ravens are next. So for the Saints, you got Michael Thomas, Traquan Smith, and Cameron Meredith. Now, they both had decent games there before the bye week, and then people somewhat may have forgotten about him. Traquan Smith, 3 catches for 111 yards, 2 touchdowns week 5 against Washington. Cameron Meredith, 5 catches for 71 yards against Washington. And then Michael Thomas, I don't care who he plays, he's a must start every single week. But can we trust Meredith or Traquan? Only in really deep leagues. They're definitely somebody who I would like to have on my roster if possible. But am I feeling safe enough to start them this week against the Baltimore Ravens and their improved secondary? Not so much. Now, yes, the Ravens are the 5th ranked fantasy defense against opposing wide receivers. Those numbers are somewhat skewed also. They played the Titans last week where they only gave up 4 receptions for 70 yards to opposing wide receivers, so that made them look a lot better than they are. The week before that, against the Cleveland Browns, they gave up 14 receptions, 208 yards, and a touchdown to opposing wide receivers, and they've given up double-digit catches every week except for week 1. This is a decent secondary, but they are beatable. I'm definitely starting Michael Thomas. But Cameron Meredith and Traquan Smith, I want to see it from him more than just 1 week before I trust him in my fantasy lineup. On the Ravens side, we have another hashtag that I need to address. I said it with Funchess, and I got to say it with Krabs. I mean, I go never Crabtree every week, but can I go against it? The guy had 21 points last week, 6 catches for 93 yards and a touchdown. The week before that, 6 catches for 66 yards, which is a very bad omen for that number. But is he starting to turn the corner and somebody that we can start? They're going up against the New Orleans Saints defense, which is definitely a team you can throw against. Heck, twice so far this season, the New Orleans Saints have given up 4 touchdowns in a game to opposing wide receivers, giving up on average 50 points a game. But can I go against the hashtag? I gotta stick with Never Crabs, right? I can't change my mind now. I can't become a bandwagon Crabtree fan. So I'm going to put a disclaimer in there. I am not a Michael Crabtree fan, and I'm going to still say never Crabtree. However, if you have Crabtree and you have some of these guys who may be on a bye, if you were to throw them into your flex spot, I wouldn't hold it against you. Read the fine print down below. I'm now, removing myself from all liability of anything to do with Michael Crabtree. Cowboys and Redskins are next, so we're going to start off with a case of the Beasles, talking about Cole Beasley, who last week had 9 catches, 101 yards, and 2 touchdowns against the Jacksonville Jaguars, which are supposed to be one of the best defenses in football. And this week they get the Washington Redskins, who just gave up 179 yards and 2 touchdowns to opposing wide receivers, giving up on average 36 points per game. Cole Beasley is the only option in this passing offense that I would trust at this point, and it's mostly in PPR leagues as a flex play only. On the Redskins side of the football, you got a bunch of injuries. You got Jamison Crowder banged up. Paul Richardson's had injuries here the past few weeks. Josh Doxson's been banged up. I don't really trust any of these guys going forward. They're all too boom or bust for me. Neither one of them are getting large enough volume to make up for their inefficiencies. I'm going to sit all the wide receivers for the Washington Redskins. Rams and 49ers are next, and it looks like Cooper Kupp's probably going to miss this game. But Brandon Cooks and Robert Woods are must-starts every single week. Not even going to sell you on these guys. Definitely starting both Brandon Cooks and Robert Woods. On the 49ers side of the football, we had ourselves a Marquise Goodwin sighting. I love this guy in the preseason. I loved him, and then he got hurt. And then Jimmy G got hurt. And then we had C.J. Beathard to worry about. And then all of a sudden, he comes out for 4 catches, 126 yards, and 2 touchdowns, and looks like Superman on the field. But can we trust it going forward? He was dropped in a lot of leagues. Heck, his own percentage was down in the 40%, range. Do we go out there and grab him and start him right away, especially against a Rams defense? I'm not that quick to do that. I definitely will go back out there and try to pick him up in a lot of leagues, but I got to see it happen consistently from C.J. Beathard before I throw him back in my lineup. You guys saw it last week. He's an elite talent, but it's still C.J. Beathard, And kind of similar to the whole Ryan Fitzmagic and now Mitch Magic, at some point Beathard's going to come back down to earth, I think. I don't think he's as good as he's been playing, but Marquise Goodwin is something I definitely want to go back and pick up, but I'm not going to start him this week. And the same thing goes for Pierre Garçon. His best game of the year so far was back in week 2 when he had 4 catches for 57 yards, no touchdowns on the season. He's not somebody that I'm starting right now either. But let's keep an eye on Marquise Goodwin going forward. In a game full of must-starts for the wide receiver position, let's talk about the Bengals and the Chiefs next. I'm starting all of these wide receivers on both teams. Tyler Boyd, AJ Green, Tyreek Hill, Sammy Watkins. Now, yes, when I said Sammy Watkins, a lot of you probably made a face like this because you really don't want to start said Sammy Watkins, and I get it. He's been highly inconsistent. Last week, a whole 2 catches for 18 yards against the New England Patriots. However, this offense is something you want to have a part of. If you have Sammy Watkins, more than likely he's your flex play anyway. He's shown upside in this offense before, and they have a great matchup going up against the Cincinnati Bengals, who have allowed receiving touchdowns every week with the exception of week 5 so far this year. They give up on average 38.7 points per game to opposing wide receivers. This is going to be a lot of back and forth, a lot of points scored, and like I said, I'm starting everybody. Giants and Falcons on Monday Night Football, so Odell Beckham, definite must start. Sterling Shepard's somebody who's been somewhat disappointing at times this season, but he does have double-digit points 3 out of the last 4 weeks in PPR formats. Yes, last week only 3 catches for 37 against the Philadelphia Eagles, which was disappointing, but this week they get the Falcons, who are very easy to throw on. They have allowed multiple touchdowns to opposing wide receivers in 4 out of the last 5 games so far this year. They're giving up 43 points per game to opposing wide receivers, and Sterling Shepard is going to be a flex play start for me this week. And like I said, Odell Beckham, definite must start. For the Falcons side, you got Julio Jones. I don't care that he's not scoring touchdowns. You're still starting Julio Jones if you got him. But Mohamed Sanu and Calvin Ridley both dealing with injuries. Sanu with a hip injury, Ridley with an ankle injury. And I don't know their status for week 7 as of yet. It's still a little bit too early in the week. It's something we need to monitor going forward. If either of them are limited going into the weekend, I'm going to sit them both and really count on a big game from Julio Jones. If they're practicing in full by the end of the week, both Sanu and Ridley are safe flex play starts for me this week, but it really depends on their injury designation going into the weekend. That's what's going to make the final decision for me. All right, so there's all the matchups for Week 7. Start sits for the wide receiver position. Really appreciate your guys' support. Make sure you guys are liking, commenting, subscribing on the channel. I try to respond to as many comments as I can. I get thousands and thousands a week, but we have a community of over 24,000 people right now willing to help out. A lot of positiveness down in the comment section, and I really appreciate you guys helping me out down there. Hopefully everybody has a good rest of your week, and we'll talk to you later. Thanks. Have a good one. Bye.